I used to go traveling with my late mother and brother quite often when we were teenagers. In fact, we used to spend entire school semesters traveling on either the Queen Elizabeth II or Queen Mary II, with her and my godmother or family friends, or doing a land-based tour. In August 2006, we had a cruise on the Queen Elizabeth II to the Mediterranean planned, so my mom had a cool idea. We had this book about haunted pubs and inns in Great Britain, so we went a week early to England and spent it traveling to haunted inns and pubs that were listed in the book, and we wanted to see if anything paranormal happened to us before boarding the Queen Elizabeth II Mediterranean voyage. It wasn't meant to be a serious investigation. My mom and I have been given the gift of second sight, or what some call a third eye, which basically means we're kind of psychic. I know that sounds weird, and I'm a man of science, so it even baffles my own self, but I have to believe it, because there's no other logical explanation for the events that have occurred. Mom was able to accurately predict major events in the world and in our family, and even in her own life. She could also feel, as I can as well, the presence of spirits. Her sense was much more in tune than my sense is. I generally act as a ghost magnet, so I attract a lot of attention from them and can tell when one is present, but not the gender or background of the spirit like my mom could. Now, being Americans of close British friends, we also had some folks to visit in Cornwall at that time. Now, Americans have got to understand just how old Britain is. 1700s is old in America, but in Great Britain and Ireland, that's just the blink of an eye. You'll routinely stay in historic houses, and as my mom used to say, you can't swing a dead cat in Great Britain without hitting something haunted. That never rung truer than a stiflingly hot day in mid-August of 2006 in London. We were staying at the renowned Goring Hotel, located right across from the walls of Buckingham Palace. Now, as an hotel that has occasionally hosted the Queen herself, they have almost an obligation to keep up the historic integrity of the hotel. Of course, that includes renovating. Now, this particular night, we were one of only 2 rooms on the entire floor that were in use. The rest were vacant and being renovated. They even had drop cloths and everything. The first morning there, my mom wakes up, and at breakfast in the sunroom/terrace, she asked if I heard the commotion last night. I asked her what she meant, and she said she woke up suddenly around 3 a.m. for no reason, to hearing drawers and closet doors opening and slamming in the vacant room next to us. It's important to keep in mind the layout of this room. We had a short little entrance area, and then 2 French doors into the room. The Goring is famed for its wooden sheep that inhabit the rooms, so of course our bedroom had one. Mom and I were in separate twin beds close to each other, not touching but close, and they were backed up against a wall that was shared with this empty room. So, of course, I tell her I didn't hear anything, and she just left it at that. Until the next night, when I myself suddenly woke up at 3 a.m. to see my mom in bed, petrified. Before she says anything, I hear a resounding thump from the wall. Then another thud, and drawers moving in and out, doors to the bathroom being opened and closed. I could feel the drawers opening and closing violently through the wall between our beds and the other room. In fact, it got so loud, it really did seem like a person was in the other room looking for something. It continued for a good 20 to 30 minutes before we grew annoyed, like there was clearly another person in there. I suddenly knew. This is what she was talking about. But we weren't going to have someone causing us to lose sleep, so we walked out into the hallway and down to the next vacant room. We assumed perhaps a worker was playing a joke on us, so to get him back, my mom pounded on the door to the room. We waited and waited and waited, but nothing, not a sound from the room. We head back into our room and try to fall asleep again. Then, very faintly, there was a knock at our door, in the exact same pattern as the knock my mom used, much louder on the empty room. And the temperature in the room started to plummet, to where Mom woke up again, and all we could do was stay in our beds and pray it would leave us alone. Our thermostat was set to a comfortable 72 degrees, but shortly after we heard that knock, it went down to 60. It was like you could cut the air with a knife, so thick with sudden tension. My brother somehow remained passed out during all of this, but it felt like someone was watching us intensely, as if something was inside the room. I was too scared, so I pulled the covers up over my head and just prayed to God they wouldn't be flung off me. Then the spirit vanished, taking the cold atmosphere suddenly with it and bringing the room back to its usual temperature. The next day, we went down to the concierge and we asked if someone was next door or if the workmen were in the habit of coming back 2 nights in a row at 3 a.m. and start rummaging through the drawers and closet. He gave us a slightly weird look and said, of course, we would not send someone up there at 3 in the morning. It would be rude. We knew from staying there several times over the years that while devilishly cheeky, Ernest was a good man who wouldn't lie to customers, especially over something that disturbed some of their regular guests. His words only confirmed what my mom and I already suspected was true. There was a spirit in the room with us, and I'll never forget how I felt that night. When I was a kid, there was this old manor house known as Aberpergam Manor. It was owned by the Williams family, who also owned the colliery about a mile away from the manor house. The colliery is still there and active. I don't believe it's still owned by the last descendant of the Williams, but I know he sold the old manor and the surrounding land to a friend of mine's mother, who converted it to a farm with her boyfriend. This is back when I was about 15 or 16 years old. It was named the White Lady Farm, after the urban legend about a bride who was stood up by her groom and ran away with her sister. Heartbroken, she supposedly hung herself and was rumored to have haunted the old manor and the surrounding area. I heard this story when I was a young boy, but never thought much of it. When they had just got the farm up and running, I remember we brought the story up and we laughed and joked about it when all the pigs behind the wooden fence, bunched up together looking in our direction, began squealing like crazy. It was spooky, but it got even weirder. I remember staying there one school night, not long after that instance, and it being completely at the back of my head. It was just me and my friend in a small caravan playing Operation Genesis, and we were expecting another friend of ours to join the party. He lived about a 5-minute walking distance from the farm. There was a knocking on the door and we opened it thinking it was him, but no one was there. The area is surrounded by gravel. Anyone who would be walking around, we would hear them. We called him to check where he was, and he said he just left the house. 5 minutes later, we hear the same knock, and again we open the door to our friend walking down the path, roughly about 50 meters away. Didn't make sense, and it never happened again during that night. A few weeks later, I stayed there again. Sometime during the night, the gas generator cut out. It was me, my friend, and his younger brother. My friend hands me his lighter and tells me to shine it on the generator so he could see what he was doing, when suddenly a completely black figure ran past me from my right and my head panned with it as I watched it disappear into the darkness. To my right there is a fence where the pigs live, and it's about 4 feet in height. There's a gravel path to my 12 o'clock. Whatever that was would have had to make a noise to jump over the fence, and it would have had to make a noise when running on the gravel, which it did not. It looked like it was an actual person dressed up in a black hoodie and tracksuit pants, and it had weird looking legs, as if it was wearing football socks that went over the bottoms. Very strange experience. Not like the horror films, because in a horror film it's expected that something is going to happen, but I could have never predicted this. After that, I was just left with the feeling of, okay, that just happened. Once in a while, my friend's parents would tell us that they could sometimes hear ballroom music playing at all hours of the night. They did end up eventually moving out of the house a few years later and built a new house a few miles further up from the farm. I can only wonder why. My boyfriend and I stayed at a pub hotel in the early summer, back when we were in a long-distance relationship. He would regularly come up to see me, and we'd stay in different hotels in my area of England because I live with my family. In this pub, in the room we were staying in, we'd been having a little bit of an argument, but before it could escalate, I decided to go outside and sit in my car for 5 minutes. So I left the hotel and sat in my car, which was in the car park, a little after 9 p.m. When I returned to the room about 5 minutes later, my boyfriend told me that we were in trouble with the manager for being noisy. He told me that after I left the room, the manager had knocked on our room door and told him off for making noise, saying he received 2 complaints about it. Before we checked out the next morning, I was looking out of our room window and saw a young couple also leaving and wondered if it had been them who we annoyed and had complained. We went out for breakfast and things about the complaint didn't add up to me. For one thing, we were not that loud and we hadn't been arguing for even that long before I went out to my car. So how had 2 people managed to complain and for that complaint to go straight to the manager, all in the space of the 5 minutes it took me to walk to my car and back? I concluded to my boyfriend that the manager must have just heard us himself and made up that 2 different guests had complained. Fast forward to the afternoon of that day that we checked out, and we unexpectedly needed to book another night at this pub/hotel due to the trains all being on strike when my boyfriend was due to travel back home. While I was at work, my boyfriend went back to the pub and checked us in for another night. He apologized for us being noisy the night before to the woman who was checking him in again. The woman said she hadn't known about us having made a noise, and my boyfriend told her that the manager had knocked on our door last night and told him off. The woman member of staff said that it was odd because the only staff they have on at night was the chef and the young male bartender, and neither of them go upstairs, and that their manager was a woman with blonde hair, not a man. The female member of staff said she doesn't know who this man was, none of the staff do, but that other guests have also told her the same, that a man had knocked on their door complaining about the noise, implying to be the manager. Well, the man my boyfriend had spoken to was in his 60s, with gelled back salt and pepper hair, and he was really mean. My boyfriend recalled to me later that when he apologized, this man just glared at him and didn't make a move to leave, so my boyfriend just awkwardly shut the door on him. My boyfriend asked who else had stayed there, but was told that us and the other young couple I saw leaving were the only guests that previous night. This left us questioning who on earth the man who knocked on our door was pretending to be the manager. So that night we were feeling quite creeped out. We were in a different room that was just opposite of the one we previously stayed in. Eventually we forgot about it and were having a bit of a laugh when a really hard knock on our room door rang out. My heart sank and I told my boyfriend not to answer because it was that man again. He of course answered anyway. The door was about 2 to 3 feet away from the bed we were on. He opened the door and there wasn't anybody there or in the corridor, which we were at the very end of. It was a long, straight, creaky corridor. We were terrified by now. The next day, my boyfriend emailed the pub explaining the situation and saying we were concerned a weird stranger was knocking on doors in their hotel. We gave them the exact times of both incidents and asked them to check their CCTV cameras, one of which was right next to both of the rooms that we had stayed in. The manageress replied to his email with this: "Following your recent complaint about another guest knocking at your door late at night, we reviewed our CCTV footage at the times you stated these incidents took place. On the first night, at exactly 9:05 p.m., CCTV footage showed a man knocking and having a brief conversation with the guest in the room, after which the man turned left and walked down the corridor. However, he was not picked up on any CCTV footage leaving the premises or walking further down the corridor. Following this, we have gone over security points of the building and made sure all entrances are secured to prevent anything like this from happening again. On the next day, however, we did not pick up anything unusual happening on our cameras at the stated time of the incident. We hope these incidents don't affect your stay at our pub, and we apologize profusely for any stress this may have caused. Just know we have taken all measures to resolve this. Kind regards." This email to us made us feel validated that we didn't imagine our experiences, especially to have it confirmed by the manager herself via CCTV. We did ask to see the CCTV ourselves, but our further emails were ignored, unfortunately. This pub was taken over by a pub chain company, and they are very strict with their staff about being anti-ghost and only focusing on quality customer service, according to a former member of staff who I by chance managed to speak to. I was told that a woman and her husband had worked at that pub back in the 90s, and our story sounded familiar and had happened to countless guests back when they worked there. She said that the pub was originally a coaching inn, built in the 1600s, and that when the pub was being renovated, her husband had kept a framed receipt dated from the 1600s and was about to be thrown away by the new owners, which are still the current owners. She also told me that she was in a group of some of her friends who also worked there, and she asked them to recall some of the things they had experienced. One had mentioned that a family complained a man had woken them up through the night violently banging on their door and screaming in the corridor. Another one was a guest that saw a figure of somebody in their room standing at the fireplace and staring into the fire. The staff used to hear all kinds of banging in empty rooms, and once they showed a guest to their room, which had already been cleaned and made ready for them, they would only walk in and find it absolutely trashed, with the bed sheets pulled out and pillows on the floor. To add to that, I contacted a local historian to see if he had any information. In his archives, he found an old newspaper clipping about the manager of this pub, who back in the 80s had been written about in the newspaper for being really strict and nasty to his guests, always complaining about the tiniest bit of noise. In the summer of 2008, I was employed as a contractor and control systems engineer by Severn Trent Water. I was working in Ambergate pumping station next to Carsington Water in Derbyshire, next to the village of Matlock. It was late in the afternoon, around 4 p.m., and I was asked to go to the pumping station. I was rather busy that day and initially asked why one of the operators couldn't be sent instead. Someone jokingly said with a laugh, "Well, it's haunted, and the other guy won't go back in there." Whilst I do believe in ghosts and had my fair share of weird, but not particularly disturbing paranormal experiences, I just thought someone was having a laugh and wasn't being serious. Ambergate Pumping Station is one of those old grand Victorian pump houses, and is quite deceiving as it extends around 3 stories below ground. The first experience I had, I descended the 3 flights of metal stairs to the bottom of the pump house and carried my small bag of tools down along with a folding metal table. Despite being a warm summer's day outside, it was cold, damp, and dark in there, being quite dimly lit with no natural light. The job wasn't a big one. Test the panel and trace out the fault. Pretty normal stuff. I had been there about 10 minutes when my bag of tools flew off the table behind me and 6 feet across the room, hitting the wall with a thud and a clang and spilling its contents out onto the floor. I didn't see it happen, but as soon as I heard it hit the wall, I spun around. I was quite bewildered as I was completely alone in there. My tool bag wasn't balanced on the edge of the table where it might have fallen off. It would have had to be lifted and thrown, plus it weighed around 10 kilograms. I gathered all my tools, put them back in my tool bag, and set it back down on the table. Fortunately, the job was almost finished, and my tool bag wasn't moved a second time. 5 minutes later, I picked up the tool bag, folded up the table, and made my way out of there. I drove back to the Severn Trent officers near to the village of Clay Cross, and when I got back, one of the guys asked me if I had fun in there. I didn't say anything much about it. My second experience happened 2 weeks later when I had to go back to Ambergate, and this time, nothing was thrown, but it was a far weirder experience. I entered the pumping station around midday. I had the usual bag of tools and folding metal table with me. I switched the lights on and descended the stairs down to the bottom. As I stepped off the final metal step, the light switched off. I set my tools down on the floor along with my metal table and slowly groped my way up the 3 flights of stairs in the pitch dark. I unfortunately didn't have a flashlight, and this was well before the times of smartphones with lights also. Given my previous experiences, I felt a bit unnerved by this climbing the stairs, but there was nothing else I could do. Finally, I made it back upstairs, and after some fumbling around, I found the light switch. I switched it, and thank God the lights came back on. I walked back down the steps, and lo and behold, I reached the bottom step, and click, the lights went off again. This time I felt even more nervous climbing the stairs in the pitch black, but I had a plan B. I went out to my car, and in the trunk I had some duct tape. I cut a large piece of this duct tape and taped it firmly across the light switch. For a third time I walked down the stairs, and when I got to the bottom of the stairs, the light started flickering. A lot. It was as if someone at the top of the stairs was playing with the light switch, but now couldn't turn it off. Again, I stayed in there 10 to 15 minutes until my job was done, but all throughout this time the lights were flickering as if someone or something was messing with the light switch but couldn't turn it off due to the duct tape. I didn't like it in there, so I completed my job and got out of there immediately. I've told a handful of people. With regards to the first experience, someone said, "Oh well, you must have put it on the edge of the table and it fell off." But that doesn't explain how my tool bag ended up 6 feet away. They tried to explain that the second incident with the lights was someone playing a prank on me, but I am 100% certain it wasn't. There was no one else there. I heard no footsteps, no voices, and no one entering or leaving through the heavy metal doors of the pump house. Plus, this location is fairly remote, and if it were a coworker, they would have had to follow me there and then drive back, which is unlikely for someone to go to that extreme just to play a prank. Fortunately, I've never had to go back there, and I certainly don't want to.